Right, it's Thursday evening and you know what we do right here on Switch TV. It's time for Tipping Point. My name is Nick Mudimba. Hope you're keeping safe wherever you are. Difficult moments we're having as a country, and of course, as you know very well, it's a global situation. And right in studio today, we're going to touch base on so many things that are actually affecting our country in one way or another. As you know very well, Kenyans are up in arms that the government is actually using 1 billion a day, so they want questions, they want actual answers from that. And I'll be joined by Kidi Mwaga, I beg your pardon, who's a lawyer, and of course later on via Skype, hopefully we'll get Gideon Mulyungi, who is the MP Mwingi Central, to touch base on what's happening in this country. So much is happening. The tax issues, the CRB debate, what is really happening. CBK came with the directive, banks are not following the directives, but still we hope solutions will be found soon. You can be part of the conversation, 22999, our SMS lines. I'll be able to sample your views as we proceed on the show. On Twitter, use the hashtag TippingPointKE, and I promise I'll actually be engaging with you online. Kidi Mwaga, good to see you today, my brother.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, a lot is happening in this country, and just wondering, we are fighting the pandemic, and still there's so much that we need to fix. Yes, unfortunately, floods are wreaking havoc in different parts of the country, landslides, but again, looking at the bigger problem we have, the COVID-19, every day there must be an infection, over 5 infections, and we're wondering what will actually, what's in store for Kenyans. When do you think this might end? I know you're not on my dick. WHO has said brace for more time, but when do you think this might just end?
At the very least, you realize that governments across the globe have resorted to certain measures, which include but not limited to lockdowns and curfews,
yes,
ability to ensure that those who are infected therefore do not move around infecting others.
Yes.
This means that for the next 6 months at the very least, we are going to, the world economy is only going to bounce back once the last person is accounted for.
Okay.
That is going to take some time. So in regards, and then when it comes to also vaccine,
okay,
then the WHO tells us that it's going to take, and CDC tells us that it is going to take about 1 year, okay, to come up with a vaccine that of course can then be used, sure, for clinical testing.
Sure.
So at the very least, let's look at a year for us to bounce back fully. Yes.
Wow, a year.
Yes.
So 2020
at the very least.
At the very least. So 2020 is actually gone.
As we speak right now,
yeah,
I think it's proper that we brace ourselves for 2020 that is messy, so that at the very least, okay, we are only able to regain our footing in 2021.
Absolutely.
And that is at the very least.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So let's brace for lots of disappointments.
Yeah, I mean, I would call it a lot of tough times ahead.
Tough times ahead.
Yes.
All right. So on 22999, you can tell me what you're actually going through right now, because we have to be in this together. So 22999, you can SMS us, and I'll be sampling some of your views. Remember, someone said on social media that if you have an income right now, you should actually thank God. Things are really happening in this country. People are losing their jobs. Salary are actually being slashed. Some people are being told to go home and paid leave. Some are going home without even knowing when they'll return. And so many companies have insisted that people should work from home, and many of them, they do not really understand when they'll be called back to work. So the little you have, count your blessings, because there's more actually 2020 has to offer, not on the positive side, but on the negative perspective. But now, Kidi, let's start with the tax law, because now Kenyans saw that the president came up with a very good directive of just cushioning Kenyans from all this high spending scenario, whereby now payee, that's pay as you earn, will go down from 30% to 25%. Yes, many people expected this will be actually instant. Yes. KRA came on social media and said Parliament has to approve this. Yes, it's on the pipeline, but do you think already we are on 23rd of April, and so many people will be paid either this week or next week?
Yes.
Now, depending on the policy of so many companies, the payroll has already been submitted. Now, do you think this will change maybe this month? Because you feel like some gaps should have been sealed a long time ago.
In answering you, permit me to use the words of Colin Powell,
Yes.
the former Secretary of State of America.
Yeah. Yes.
He says that American foreign policy is a huge beast, that if you kick it at the head,
Yes.
it takes 2 years for that pain to be transmitted. I mean, if you kick it at the feet, kick its feet,
Yes.
it takes 2 years for that pain to be transmitted to the head.
Yes.
The government as it is wants to operate like a huge beast that is not entirely in touch.
Okay.
The operational word is entirely in touch with the needs of its citizens.
Okay.
At times like this, when our country, our economy, and various facets of our lives have been disrupted,
Yes.
especially by a pandemic of this magnitude, we expected the government to do more,
Okay.
and more on substance rather than on form, or what others would call public relations.
Sure.
You know, when the president came and talked to the nation and said that we are putting in place these measures, one, cautioning people who are earning less than 24,000 from pay as you earn,
Yes.
by giving them 100% tax relief, and he announced some other measures. We are a constitutional democracy, and therefore certain institutions had to get to work and do certain things to give these presidential directives effect. But then things have moved so slowly from then to date, so that as April pay is going to come in, a lot of people, especially those who then earn more than 24,000 were supposed to get a 25% tax relief. You see, that can't happen until the government, the parliament sits and passes that.
Yeah, many Kenyans didn't know that actually. They thought it's actually just a direct directive from the president and things will just be executed.
Yes.
But look, they didn't question this earlier. We're finding loopholes also in the public education.
That is because of where we are coming from.
Yes.
You know, we are coming from an era where we had a president who was a law unto himself. So that then this was then changed by Constitution of Kenya 2010, that therefore certain actions and decisions by the president has to undergo certain procedures. Yes. So that is why a lot of Kenyans were thinking that Rais akisema
ni hivyo, bas. Wow, interesting days. So meaning there's a loophole in terms of public education.
Yes.
Because now people are surprised. KRA came out and said, hey guys, Parliament has to sit down and pass this. Yes, it's on the, you could give it a scale of 1 to 10. We're saying it is actually at 8. Parliament might be passing this anytime, today or tomorrow.
Yes.
But look, the other Kenyans who don't care about pay. Kenyans who really don't care about what KRA is saying or the government is saying about cushioning us from all these harsh conditions.
Yes.
There's a common mwananchi who is living hand to mouth.
Yes.
This Juakali sector, Mjengo sector, it's crazy because now this person has to fend for his or her family day in, day out, whether Sunday or he or she doesn't have an off day.
Yes.
Now, these people, looking at the products also you have in this country, from mafuta ya kupikia, from even the things like sabuni.
Yes.
These are the things that actually I can say zinasukuma maisha ya mwananchi wa kawaida. But looking at even the tax laws in this country, do we need to wait for Parliament again to push this agenda? Because now look at the common mwananchi. Common mwananchi doesn't care about pay right now. What do you think about that?
Nick, you know, before we blame Corona for everything,
Yes.
we must also appreciate that we were in a very bad shape as a country,
Yes.
in economic speak.
Yes.
So that a lot of micro and small enterprises were suffering.
Yeah.
And a lot of young people, people who are casuals, the waiter and the waitress, people who live on their tips, were already feeling the heat.
Yes.
So that with the coming of Corona, it has only made a bad case worse. And now that Corona seemed to have acted as a gadfly that stung the government into action, we expected the government to do much more to cushion its people. We talk about, when we talk about the 25% tax relief,
Yes.
and the 100% tax relief, we are forgetting that more than half of our population are people who are surviving on the informal economy. An informal economy, which means that it is not even captured in our national economic estimates.
It's true.
It's not anywhere. Look at the bodaboda sector, for instance. You go to Western Kenya and you realize that a large number of young people are surviving on the bodaboda sector.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Actually, not only in Western Kenya.
Yes.
Very many parts of the country, sure.
Yes. But then you realize that these are people who do not even enjoy credit worthiness.
Yes.
Because there is no way that the government has not put in place deliberate measures to make sure that their earnings are reflected somewhere that can then demonstrate that this is what this person earns in a month.
Yeah.
And therefore that government financial institutions can then rely on that to gauge their credit worthiness or not.
Yes.
So that there are a lot of people who, over and above what the government has put in place, still feels that the government has neglected them. And if and when other government agencies get opportunity to hear what some of us are saying, is that the Treasury and Parliament and the Executive I mean, must do much more in cushioning the people of Kenya.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, people are suffering.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, the red tapes, embargoes just put in place to make sure a Kenyan doesn't access credit.
Yes.
I know mitigation is on right now,
yes,
but you've mentioned something very important.
Yes.
The common mwananchi, we've actually taken a case study of a boda rider who can't access credit, who maybe has no smartphone, can access maybe an online credit facility to sort him out. These are people who are majority in this country. Sometimes we forget and focus on the elite side.
Yes.
Do you think these people at some point will actually lose patience? And you know what it means by losing patience? The rate of crime will actually go up.
Yes.
So many things will go up. Even right now, as you know very well, statistics, when you talk about gender-based violence, just last week I mentioned somewhere that out of 10, 6 women were subjected to gender-based violence.
Sorry.
But these are men who are actually depressed out here. And these are the guys in the informal sector. Also, unfortunately, relatives are taking advantage of these young girls.
Yes.
Funny enough, actually. It's a very rotten society. But look, let's go back to this common mwananchi who has to really struggle. And sometimes most of them during the curfew time, this is when they actually earn in the evening.
Yes.
Do you think we're going to see something very red coming soon? Because now when you talk about crime rates going up, what do you think about all this?
Well, you know, previously, even before this, some of us were of the view that the government was doing very little to ensure that the young person who has gone to school or who may not have gone to school has an opportunity to earn a living.
Yes.
Because, you know, Nick, politics is about who gets what, how and when.
Absolutely.
So that if and when a huge swath of the population or of the populace is left to its own devices, then that is a ticking time bomb.
Absolutely. It's true that.
They may not be able to read and write. They may not be able to speak big English. They may not be able to do this sophisticated stuff. But these are people who, of course, can scale a wall.
It's true that.
Can get an AK-47.
Yes.
Can get a Seska.
God forbid.
And God forbid, yes. It is not what we are saying, are advocating for. And then these people would scale walls and get into the homes of the middle class, and then that chaos would reign.
Yes.
So that some of us think that the president and parliament and all governmental agencies that are responsible and mandated must move in speed, not only to deploy force, because we've seen government response always to be imagining that every problem is a nail.
Absolutely.
That they need to respond to with a hammer. There is much more. They must demonstrate compassion. They need to demonstrate that they are in touch. They need to make decisions that if a ordinary person in the streets looks at, then feels that that decision is based on the best information available.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Now, CRB.
Yes.
Let's go back to the common mwananchi.
Good.
Credit Reference Bureau.
Yes.
This is where most of them are in.
Yes.
And the government said 1,000 bob and below, you'll be given a time to breathe. But look, nothing is happening.
Yes.
Let's talk to the banks now. The banks are not approving what the CBK said.
Yes.
CBK came out clearly and said 1 year just to mitigate on how Kenyans will survive. Take a 1 year break, go talk to your bank, and they'll accept automatically.
Yes.
Kenyans flocked banks and said, we need this problem solved. I have no income right now. Please give me a year. Some are given 3 months, but you have to pay at least a half. Some are given 3 months break. But look, the banks are also in business. And so many people didn't get it. They went to the banks. Banks are telling them, we'll contact you. Now, those people used to call relationship managers. Now you're avoiding managers. They don't want to see you now. They are managing you very well.
Yes.
Do you think these directives should come with some little bit of research and power? Because we feel like the loopholes are trickling down to the common mwananchi.
One thing I will tell you is that banks always will resist government regulation.
Yes.
And banks always would want to be given the latitude to decide what they think is best for them. And you saw them even resisting the issue of credit caps and interest caps and whatnot. When the CBK governor, Mr. Patrick Njoroge, was speaking, he said that you may go to your bank and negotiate.
Yes.
The word may gives power. I mean, gives, it is not an obligation. It means that the financial institution has got the discretion to choose to give you this break and to determine how long that break will last. I think because financial institutions are generally known to harass people, if the government is keen, and I hope they are keen to cushion their people, is that I think they need to come out slightly more forceful and say that this is what should happen. We are issuing a moratorium on loans for, let's say, 6 months or for 1 year or for such a period, so that people are able to concentrate their energies, one, on making sure that they have a roof over their heads, that they are able to tuck their children in bed in full tummies, and that they can then think about sanitizing and observing social distance. Because if that seems to be the pressing need right now, because it is until we are able to account for the last person with corona infection, I mean, we shall still be in a circus. That is why the government must come out more strongly. Absolutely, in my view.
It's crazy because now this is where we needed the government actually to come in and save Kenyans. But you see, there's a law of instrument that was converted to a quote, and it says, when you all have a hammer, or maybe says when all you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail, actually.
True.
So the government has a hammer. And you see, it will hit you so hard this time around, because now even talks of 40 billion shillings being used for 40 days is actually bizarre. So many Kenyans are asking questions, but you can still send me your SMSs on 22999. I'll be sampling some of them. When we come back after the break now, I'll be joined via Skype by Member of Parliament, Mwingi Central, Gideon Munyongi, who will now be also touching base with us about the whole scenario in the country. Remember, some people are being taken to quarantine as punishment. Also, that's a topic we really want to discuss. And some people escaped, and the government is on their trail. All are coming to you after a short break. Keep it tipping point. All right, welcome back to Tipping Point, and this is where we want to touch base on so many things happening in this country. And you know very well, Kenyans are not happy with the fact that some media outlet came out to say that the government is using 40 billion, 1 billion per day, but that was uttermost misinformation, because according to that the finance CS Ukuri Yatani, I beg your pardon, came out to say that even some cash or money hasn't been used on so many things. So it seems like misinformation is also out here. But again, I'll just go through some of your tweets, and the headline 40 billion. Some of the money is not even spent yet, as I said, but the media house wants to make Kenyans believe that 40 billion has been spent in 40 days. This is the highest, greatest misinformation of all times, fake news, and we must fight it. Totally unacceptable. And Muriuki says the issue about 40 billion is not all about misuse of funds, but we need Kenyans to actually come out of this coronavirus pandemic. But before I actually go through the Skype, do you think the issue of this 40 billion, you know, Kenyans are so worried. How can he use 41 billion per day? Like, really? Yes.
Well, one thing I know is that it is easy to bandy out figures out there.
Yes.
But then it is another thing, a completely different ball game, to now go back and audit item by item what money has been spent on. And then there have been conflicting information, especially by the news outlet that first broke this out.
Okay.
Yes, they attempted to make a correction by saying that it is not 40 billion spent, it is 40 billion allocated.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so I think it is prudent if we all wait and until we have sufficient information on whether it is expenditure or whether it is an allocation, and therefore if it is an allocation, which governmental agencies have been allocated what.
Absolutely.
So that because there is an element of disaster preparedness that has never been seen in the history of this country. So that it is for the first time that the government, I think, in its wisdom, is trying to prepare for an epidemic, a pandemic of this magnitude. So I think a little patience so that we have all the information, then we are able to comment authoritatively on what is what and which is which. Thank you.
All right, let's now cross over to Skype, and we are meeting with the government expert, that's Philip Mwangali, who will be now taking us through this whole conversation. No one is happy with the situation, yes. But Philip, if you can hear, and of course see us right in studio, good to have you on board today on Tipping Point. There's so much going on in this country, we can't even start and of course finish right now. But again, where you are right now, how are you keeping on, my brother? How are you keeping on? How's life? You can tell us more. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am doing okay in the circumstances. We are trying to take this pandemic in stride, do what we can to keep safe and also to survive in the circumstances.
In this country, you're an expert actually in that sector. There's so much happening also. The issue of 40 billion and 1 billion per day, does it make any sense? What do you think about all this drama? Because it feels bizarre and weird that as a country we can use 1 billion a day in fighting coronavirus.
Now, you know, when we talk about the government using 1 billion per day, of course, we're just trying to make to understand how 40 billion has been used in the span of 40 days. But I have looked at the initial breakdown of expenditure, and one of the things that is coming out clearly is that what the government has been appropriating these monies to is misplaced. And one of the things that we must be alive to is that this government has gained notoriety for misplaced priorities and for making blunder after blunder. So, for example, if you look at one of the allocations that we are told the government used this money for, there is 1.5 billion that they has gone to the NIS, the National Intelligence Service, and they say this 1.5 billion has been used for contact tracing. That is outrageous. And if you look at the different clusters that we are being treated to, what the government is saying they have used this money for, it is very difficult to account Because if you're saying that you've used 1.5 billion for contact tracing, you've used 200 million for the Ministry of Interior to beef up security. I mean, these amounts are not reasonable. That is what is happening in the first instance. In the second instance, we have a government that is very quick to defend itself. This government is afraid of embarrassment. That is one thing that we must realize. So they are trying to fit that expenditure or the amounts of money that have been used within this period anywhere else that they can find. And that is unfortunate for us.
Okay, so let's talk about the tax issues, because now this is where the common mwananchi is affected big time. The president came up with a directive from 30% to 25%, but little did the public know about the processes. And they didn't know about Parliament being involved in this. They knew actually at the 11th hour. Look at the debt. We're actually doing it on 23rd. And that means a payroll has already been submitted in most companies. And that means next week, hopefully this week, many people will be paid. But look at that loophole in terms of information. What do you think about that?
One, I think the fault here lies with Parliament. Because in as much as the president was giving his executive orders and directives, these directives could not take effect without Parliament coming in. So it would have been better, and it will have served the country better if these resolutions were coming from Parliament. Because right now, you see, we are having a situation where Parliament is catching up to the directives from the executive. So you can imagine if Parliament was sitting at the time the president was giving these resolutions, then they would have come up with a bill, passed the bill, then passed over that bill to the president for ascension. And one of the things also that has been happening is that the president has not been in touch with Parliament. Because if he was, then we would have a scenario where he's getting these resolutions from Parliament. And we will not have to have a scenario where we are having at this time where Parliament is now playing catch up to the executive. Because what happens then is that these directives and the resolutions in the bill that was passed in Parliament yesterday will take effect in the coming month. So there is no relief, immediate relief that is coming to the pockets of Mwananchi at this time. So that the lapse that we are facing now is unfortunate. It will be better if Parliament again went back, amended the bill that they have passed to say that KRA will give a relief, a tax refund, where that tax has been levied, where payee has been levied. Then a refund will be given in the next month because payrolls have already been processed at this point.
Now, what do you think about CRB? Because that's where many Kenyans are crying foul. So many of them thought maybe this time around it will be a softer landing, but they're still there. They're still listed. Do you think also in this situation we are being played as a PR? What do you think about all this?
Yeah, it's important that you have mentioned PR, because we have been treated to a lot of that in the last 30 or so days. We are now going to 41 days or so. Because when the president announced that those who had been listed on CRB would be deregistered, he failed to mention specifically that what he was referring to was those who had been listed with amounts of 1,000 shillings and less. Well, that is a considerable number of people. But a large category of people who are listed on CRB are people who with loans of over 1,000 shillings. So if you have not taken into account that demography of people, then you're not helping the situation. Those who have been listed with CRB with amounts of 1,000 and less can easily pay. But what if you have you have a loan of 5,000 shillings, 10,000 shillings, and you're not on salary? You have no way of paying these amounts. You have no way of earning. I mean, it's something that should have been sorted in the first instance. So what we are being treated to is unfortunate. The president is announcing, is giving directives, but there is no follow-up on implementation.
Okay, so Philip, before I let you go, let's talk about oil prices. You understand globally there's a situation where for the first time it has actually hit negative. And you see, this is the reason why. And the reason is actually so many, let me say this, the word depots out there in the world are not selling the crude. And no one wants to actually get crude that is due. That means now storage is also a problem. And this time, it's actually resulted to something very strange. The oil coming out, the crude oil actually coming out with negative, seen for the first time. Looking at the economies in this world, let's talk as a case study, Kenya as a country. Do you think lessons are being learned here? I understand we are kind of having a problem with the debts left, right, center, but the story of crude oil is really disheartening, because now that means no one is using their cars, no one is using the planes, actually are just lying over there. But look, as a case study, what do you think Kenya is learning from this global pandemic?
I think we are yet to take lessons that we should, because yes, the demand for oil has gone down, and that goes to say that, as you rightly mentioned, that vehicles are not on our roads. I mean, what we are classically used to as a fuel expenditure is not being used. But we have something called the cost of production that in this country has been very high throughout. And one of the factors that has led to an increase in cost of production is the price of fuel. So if the world price of fuel has drastically gone down, then we should see a drastic reduction in the price of fuel in this country. What we saw the other day when the Energy Regulatory Commission gave a few price reductions does not match up to the drastic reduction in oil prices. So we still have industries that are operating. It will be prudent for the government to make sure that the prices of oil have drastically reduced to match the reduction in international oil practice, so that industries are operating at a fair capacity, because these industries are employers. When the industries are taking a hit because their cost of production is still high, that means they will still lay off workers. So the government must work to cushion industries and make sure that cost of production has gone down exceedingly. The other thing that needs to be done, we are looking at food distribution within the country. Nairobi is on a partial lockdown. We have counties that are now on total lockdown, like Mandera. So we are having a situation where our goods, our food is moving in trucks, in vehicles. And that increases the risk of transmission of the virus.
Okay.
So, and we must also remember that the airline industry is grounded at this point.
Big time, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what the government could do, and this would be a very prudent action to do. They will reduce the cost of air navigation services, make sure that the cost of air fuel is reduced drastically, so that we can have our goods, our food, move by air around the country. It will reduce the risk of transmission of the virus through transportation of goods on the road, and it will also make the cost of goods cheaper going forward.
Thank you so much, Bwana Philip Mwangale, a government expert, governance expert right there, telling us more about just what we expect in the near future and what is actually going on. But a clarification is coming in from the media outlet that came up with the story of the government using 40 billion, and that's 1 billion a day. And they're saying now that 13 billion will be for SME support and payment of pending bills that has been disbursed. And the minister was clear that the funds were budgeted but not yet spent. So this clarification, not the issue of 1 billion being spent a day, that was actually bizarre. So the newspaper has actually regretted the error and apologized to the CS for any embarrassment caused. Now, quickly before we actually move on, we take a break. Some media outlets, I understand, we want to be the first to break this news, but look at that. Kenyans are furious. Kenyans are furious, but now apologies have actually come in.
Well, one, it places a burden of responsibility on their shoulders to do much more due diligence, to be more responsible in the news items that they release, because otherwise they may inflame the anger of Kenyans unnecessarily against a government that is trying so hard to cushion its people against a disaster. And you know, I must also say that more often than not, it is easier to point fingers at the government. You are not, while failing to take cognizance of that which the government is trying to do to make sure that we are all safe and secure.
All right, so that means no single cent has actually been spent. So that means,
and then we must also commend the government for releasing that 13 billion to pay pending bills.
Absolutely,
because that is going to ensure that there is increased financial flow, and that is going to at least help make sure that some of us are able to buy Mind Chama.
It's true. We have to survive this thing. So the current position is that the Treasury has allocated 40.3 billion to manage COVID-19, but this money has not yet been disbursed. So that was propaganda going around. So we're taking a short break. When we come back now, I'll be joined by Gideon Mulyongi, who is the Member of Parliament, Mwingi Central, and he'll now be in a good position to tell us what the Parliament is actually doing to mitigate the issues of COVID-19 in the country. Keep it Tipping Point. Welcome back to Tipping Point, and apologies, we were not able to get Mheshimiwa Gideon Mulyongi, who is the MP Mwingi Central, on Skype. We had some technical issues, but let's get back to the show, because now this is where we want to take things head on. Let's talk about education. It's also been affected in one or another. And in his address yesterday, the president said that indeed KCPE and KCSE will continue as usual. The times won't change, but that means so many pupils and students will be affected in one way or another. Teachers and educationists and all stakeholders in the education sector said this should be applied in both Class 7 and Form 3. They should also actually be amalgamated in all the plans to make sure the candidates are actually sitting for the exams, meaning that also they might just be going through, but again, that's actually subject to confirmation. But let me just go through some of your comments on what we've been discussing since we started the show. And so many Kenyans are not happy, but clarification is that the Ministry of Finance hasn't used any single coin for the 40.3 billion allocated to mitigate COVID-19 in the country. So as you know very well, the media outlet that published this has actually apologized and assured the Finance Minister, Ukur Yatani, that they're sorry for the embarrassment caused. That means due diligence sometimes is needed before rushing to actually publish some content specifically in this country. But let me just sample some of the views here on Twitter. Michael Oma says, these are indeed tough times. Enough respect to everybody trying to stay healthy, both body and mind. I must encourage you way back at home, wherever you're watching, please stay healthy and reduce the movements. All right. There's a gentleman here called Ben Awiti. Ben Awiti says that indeed these are the times you need to know even your friends who will stick by you. But I must actually just be against that, because friends might actually infect you with COVID-19. So please just keep our friends at the moment. They are there, communicate. And then Gitweka says, America, the biggest economy, is learning a lesson. Kenyans should actually be very careful. Right now, we are fighting with an enemy we don't really know. Yes, when is the vaccine coming out? So many of you are asking that. Of course, I can just tell you for free that the WHO said it will take a minimum of 18 months. Minimum, that is. So for vaccine actually to be found. But still, keep on sending your SMSs on 229. Twitter, use the hashtag #tipping.ke. And we'll continue with this. Now, Bwana Wakili, the calendar as usual, it's been affected.
Yes.
And KCSE, KCPE, right now, the candidates are panicking. They don't know what will come their way. Education setters, let me say examination setters actually also do not know actually what to set right now.
Yes.
Curriculum not really complete at the moment. We're actually going towards May.
Yes.
This is the time students actually acclimatize, knowing the environment is actually set for their final examination. But the president said this has to continue as usual. Do you think another PR coming in, or maybe this is very kind of possible?
You know, one thing we all agree is that there are instances when we have always felt that the government has its priorities lopsided.
Yes.
And if not that, then sometimes we feel that the government is placing a lot of emphasis, premiums actually, on bravado rather than on substance.
Yes.
You know, the reason why the government, in its wisdom or lack of it, put in place curfews,
Yes.
cessation of movement, and we are now staring at a possible lockdown, is because to want to ensure that there is minimal human interaction as possible, because humans are the primary carriers of the COVID-19.
Yes.
So that if the president says, maybe that is in the best case scenario, is that by then we shall have contained the virus, because national examination, as we've known it,
Yes.
can only take place, well, should I say manually or physically?
Okay.
Because we do not have the electronic infrastructure to ensure that examination is administered online. Huge swaths of this country, there is no access to even basic internet.
Okay.
Huge swaths. So that those who have a smartphone like yours truly and yourself are the elites. Yes. Children without access who have not even had opportunity to see what a laptop looks like are the majority.
It's true, but
Yes.
you know, there's something interesting. There's no way you can set exams online.
Yes.
My friend, everyone, you get an A.
Yes.
Well, that means you can't even time someone, you can't monitor people online.
Yes.
You never know what might be happening in the background. But look at also our universities right now. They're embracing e-learning.
Yes.
But I talked to one of the lecturers last week, and she told me that not all can access internet.
Yes.
You're very right.
Yes.
We are from different backgrounds. Right now, we're talking about landslides
Yes.
in the areas of Pokot.
Yes.
And we are fighting a situation where we do not know what will happen next.
Yes.
But look, when we stick to the same exam calendar in this country, it's a recipe for some sort of disaster.
Yes.
As far as performance is concerned, do you think it should be cancelled altogether so that this candidates this year, there were some proposals actually, they should sit these examinations either early next year or maybe just sit again with the following years maybe candidates? What do you think?
The extraordinary moments call for extraordinary measures.
Yes.
One of the extraordinary measures that we as a people expect from the president is that we expect a leadership that is candid. When leadership thrives in braggadocio, then it is in itself a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
Permit me the latitude to analogize this. In 1984-85, there were talks that there was HIV strain in the country. But then the leadership was dismissing that, no, there is nothing like that.
Yes.
And those people who are advocating that the country embraces use of condoms are people whose morals are questionable.
Yes, yes.
So that it took President Moi almost 15 years, because it was up to 1999
Yes.
when he said that HIV was a national disaster.
Sure.
And for the first time, he had the courage to call condoms bira ya mabenzi. I think we should learn from that and now have a leadership that is candid and tell us that, well, circumstances may force us to push forward.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a vocabulary someone is asking, braggadocio, what does it mean? I must say it just means someone who's arrogant and very kind of boastful. So you said braggadocio, is it?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're learning also in this situation. But now let's talk about something else. you're found outside curfew hours or inside curfew hours, and you're actually quarantined.
Yes.
It's strange. Right now, it's being used as a punishment.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, one thing that has emerged is that the government is keen, it actually is desperate to come out as in charge. But then they are resorting to the same archaic measures of beating up people, of leaving people with injuries and whatnot.
Yes.
Then over and above that is that people are quarantined in facilities that are not any better than an overcrowded matatu, than overcrowded kesha, than an overcrowded teenage packed jam session, so that it leaves some of us wondering if the government has placed its money where its mouth is. Because if people are quarantined at own cost, and let's say that in the best case scenario that these monies can be recovered later, how are people treated in quarantine facilities?
It's actually reports coming in. It's bad. It's bad. And just the other day we saw some around 5 young men who were jumping a wall, like
scaling walls,
actually scaling a wall and going to the other side of Mbagathi Way, escaping from KMTC Nairobi. It was crazy because now these are young people who are able to scale that wall. People inside there who can't do that. But still, risky move it is, because the government is actually on the trail right now. But looking at the action of escaping, look at that actually they're doing. This is a very, very confident move. Do you think it's putting other Kenyans at risk?
One thing is that, previously there have been talks among the population that COVID-19 is not there. One thing we must say very forcefully is that COVID-19 is real. COVID-19 is devastating. And if you look at polities where it has been reported in large scale, and you see how people are suffering, it is so bad. It's bad. The government has got a responsibility of tracing these individuals, getting hold of them, taking them back to quarantine facilities. But in the same vein and breath, the government must make sure that the conditions in quarantine facilities are humane.
Okay. Now, as we close a tipping point tonight, you have a message to Kenyans. And so many people have actually been caught on the wrong side of the law, either having parties in the house, either you are not really following what the law says and you're sent to forced quarantine. As you know very well, the other day, musician Eko Dida, he just went to buy medicine for his wife, and he was sent to forced quarantine. But there's a question here. Should this be used as a form of punishment when you don't really follow the law? And your last question is here. What should the government do to such people? We have police stations. We have the way the law can actually take control. But it seems like they're instilling fear on Kenyans by sending people to forced quarantine.
One thing is that COVID-19 has brought to us a new normal. A new normal because we are now grappling with the circumstances that we were never accustomed to before. It therefore places the burden of responsibility on the shoulders of the government to make sure that it responds to this pandemic with compassion rather than brute force.
Something else. The Kenyans actually stranded in China. And other Africans actually in China. Things are not really looking good over there. But the government came out to say they are very okay. Sarah Serema actually came out and confidently say that no one actually slept outside. I can just quote her, and she said, many Kenyans have communicated, but so far we are yet to get a Kenyan on board. But right now we have an issue with logistics, and that's actually, Sarah Serem is Kenya's ambassador to China right now. So she said that the embassy has intervened in all cases of forced evictions, and none that the government knows slept in the streets, and none that the government knows was evacuated from their houses. Now, this is something also we really need to be in solidarity with the brothers and sisters in China. These are very unfortunate situations. Looking at that picture, this is actually Kenyans and some of the Africans in the country going through a tough time. what do you think about, I understand no plane can actually come to Kenya right now.
Yes.
But just trying to make sure they're comfortable. What do you think about this?
One, you look at the story of Kenyans in China and you are left with the impression that the government is not sufficiently putting its foot down to secure her citizens in China. And the first response we got from Madam Serem initially was that the Kenyans and students, the Kenyan students in China were in our prayers.
Okay.
Prayers is very good.
Yeah.
And we must constantly keep in touch with our spiritual selves.
Sure.
But then there are things that requires pragmatic response rather than spiritual response. So that as much as we are praying for them, fine, but the government should have put in measures to either bring them home, ensure that if they remain in China, that they are in a condition that then is humane.
Absolutely.
Anything short of that is a travesty.
Absolutely.
Of monumental proportion.
Yeah, also the embassy intervened in some cases where landlords had threatened the Kenyans, where they were all either retained in their houses or taken to designated hotels funded by local authorities. Now, footing the bill to actually evacuate themselves from China. Look, the flights, no flights, only cargo flights are coming into Kenya right now.
Yes.
But you see, they have to dig deep into their pockets to make sure this happens. Is it even fair as we wind up? Yeah.
That's why we are saying that the government need to put its foot down. Bringing them back should be the last on the last option. But before then, Kenya has got a presence in Shanghai, so that through our ambassador in China, there are certain demands that Kenyan government should have put out explicitly to the Chinese government in regards to our brothers and sisters in China.
Okay.
There are a lot of information seeping out of China that a lot of Kenyans are being mistreated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we are a country that places premiums on its people or on her people, then the government of Kenya has got a responsibility to ensure that our brothers and sisters in China are able to have a roof over their heads, are able to have food, and then they're able to be safe, especially as we fight COVID-19.
Absolutely. All right. That's all we actually had for you right here on Tipping Point. My name is Nick Mudimba. And I must actually leave you with a very, very strong appeal. And of course, this is an urge that really needs to go out to people, because we are fighting, as I mentioned, an enemy we cannot see ourselves. And we are fighting something that indeed many people are taking for granted. So many Kenyans are actually right now in isolation, are sick, and it's not really good, because so many children also are lacking that parenting presence, and it's so unfortunate. Parents are actually locked down somewhere, some relatives are actually abroad, and it's a difficult time. So if you feel like you have any problem, please do not hesitate to talk to someone. Mental illness is taking a toll on so many people. Just the other day in Westlands, a woman was walking naked. Upon being questioned, she wasn't okay. She didn't talk to someone. So please, as much as we're trying to fight this, we are trying to really make our lives comfortable. Let's talk to people, because this is where solutions will be. Have yourself a good night. I'll see you again next week right here on Tipping Point.